as they prefer to be called. They are highly intelligent, and my attempts to educate them were quite successful. Within a matter of minutes, they were able to spell out Earth Man Go Home, using my two companions to form the letters. It was very gratifying. As you have doubtless already guessed, tonight's play is entitled Martha Mason.
I know where I'm at now. It used to be a restaurant.
A century of sleep, and then take a drive into the twilight zone.
And China's involvement. Help us understand why the Chinese Communist Party is involved and so involved.
Well, the Communist Chinese Party is actually really active in the United Nations. A lot of people don't realize this. Not only do they have a permanent seat at the Security Council, they have actual members of the CCP running numerous agencies. In fact, more than any other nation. The U.S. government only controls a fraction, or Americans, I should say, only control a fraction of the specialized agencies of the UN. So the CCP has done a very deliberate initiative here where they're trying to take over UN agencies. They're trying to shift UN policies and international agreements in their direction. And actually, as you read Agenda 2030, the kind of communist totalitarian bent really comes through loud and clear. If you go to, for example, goal number 10, they actually are calling openly for not just national socialism, not just national wealth redistribution, but global wealth redistribution. They say repeatedly in this document that governments in the UN must change consumption and production. Of course, if governments are going to change consumption and production, that requires taking control of the means of production. I mean, all of this stuff is just slightly reworded talking points coming out of the Communist Manifesto, coming out of Xi Jinping's little book. And so people need to be very aware.
17 years
the former
from now.
Secretary General of NATO, Javier Solana, a self-described socialist, described Agenda 2030 as the next great leap forward. We should have been paying really close attention.
And on that note, what does America's future look like if this gets adopted?
Well, Barack Obama purported to sign up for it in 2015. Thankfully, this was never presented to the U.S. Senate for ratification, and therefore it doesn't even have the appearance of legitimacy. It's not a binding treaty. That doesn't mean that they're not implementing it, right? Joe Biden and previously Barack Obama were using executive orders, federal regulations to try to bring these goals to pass. If this happens, if this continues to move forward, there's another 7 or 8 years before the next goals are set to come in. You can expect life on this planet to be radically restructured. It would be a massively more empowered United Nations, far less freedom. When they talk about wealth redistribution, I think it's important to point this out too. Their vision of wealth redistribution is looting the American middle class and redistributing the wealth of the American middle class to the CCP, to the CCP's allies who have impoverished and kept in poverty the people of what used to be called the Third World. This is a very dangerous vision. When you look at what they're talking about in education in goal number 4, they're very clearly talking about indoctrination. They want the children, they say in there, to be so indoctrinated. They won't just accept these UN ideas, really CCP-backed UN ideas. They will promote them, is the terminology that's used there. So we're really talking about drastic limitations on individual freedom, radical restructuring of the economy, and ultimately an end to self-government. So the stakes could not be higher here. Thankfully, we still have a lot of tools in the United States to make sure that this, I would call it a horror show, does not fully get imposed on the American people.
Indeed. Well, Alex Newman, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Should stay the heck out
Until it's time for you to get vaccinated.
Definitely none of their business.
12 schools. Representative Aaron Bean says the CCP influence is rampant in America's classrooms.
Over 500 K-12 schools across the United States have allowed the CCP to establish itself in their halls under the guise of Confucius classrooms. But when you pull back the curtain on these cultural exchange centers, you find a CCP-backed agenda that undermines the principles upon which our education system is built.
And he said the classrooms threaten America's national, geopolitical, and academic interests.
They are explicitly organized by the CCP Politburo to project soft power on American students.
A parent advocate said most of these programs went underground during the last administration. But
we found that over the past decade, over $17 million has flowed to 143 districts and private K-12 schools across 34 states and D.C. This is likely a low figure, given that both the U.S. State Department and the Senate have estimated hundreds more programs in existence.
Representative Bobby Scott said this.
We can provide students with an inclusive, accurate, and well-funded education without conspiracy theories that fuel anti-Asian discrimination.
One of the witnesses explained anti-Asian discrimination.
It has become a harmful pattern that when the United States has tensions with an Asian country, Asian Americans and immigrants face the backlash at home and become collateral damage. Perceived as not American, we too often are blamed for the actions of a foreign government or entity.
Representative Lisa McClain shared her immediate concerns.
So I'm here to represent our kids, the American children, the majority. That's my job. That's what I'm elected to do.
After the hearings, Representatives Virginia Fox and Burgess Owens said Americans should be concerned about the CCP.
Yes.
They mean us ill, and they want to take over the world.
If we have a foreign enemy that literally, through lack of transparency, comes through our classrooms and teaches our kids things that are not true, then that should be a concern to all of us.
In closing, Representative Dean said it's important to understand that it's not against the Chinese people, but it's against the aggressive nature of the Chinese Communist Party.
Should stay the heck out
Until it's time for you to get vaccinated.
Definitely none of their business.
Was on the scene.
A large crowd gathered right outside of the United Nations headquarters in New York City. The rally is part of a week-long campaign against the Iranian president Ebrahim Raisi, who was set to speak at the United Nations on Tuesday. The event was hosted by the Organization of Iranian American Communities, or OIAC. Former Senator Robert Torricelli said this about the Iranian president.
When Raisi walks to the podium today and shakes the hands of the leaders of the United Nations, understand that the hand that he stretches out has the blood on it of tens of thousands of martyrs from the genocide of 1988.
Rally goers allege that Raisi was involved in the decision to execute, by some estimates, 30,000 political prisoners in Iran, known as the 1988 Iranian massacre. Another speaker had this to say.
The issue of the hijab goes beyond just about women choosing the way they dress. The fight runs deeper than that. It's a fight for the reconstruction of the social laws and practices that determine a woman's life and place in society, including within their own families.
And I got a chance to speak with the chair of the advisory board of the OIAC, and she said this about Raisi.
He does not belong to the United Nations. The seat, UN seat, belongs to the people of Iran. So the message of the community members that have gathered here today is to make sure that the message of the Iranian people is heard at the UN hallways by the world leaders, which is that we want to overthrow this regime. We want this regime gone.
And I spoke with Majid Sadegpour, political director of the OIAC, who shared how the regime has affected him and others.
You know, members of my primary family have been executed during the 1988 massacre, and thousands of people who participated in today's rally, a lot of them have first-hand accounts, loved ones who they have lost in the 1988 massacre or in the uprisings that have followed over the past 3.5 decades, certainly in Iran.
And we also heard from a high school student who shared his thoughts on the recent prisoner exchange, in which the U.S. released $6 billion to Iran as part of a deal to free 5 Americans.
All this is doing is telling the Iranian regime, hey, if you take more hostages, we'll pay you money and we'll give you your criminals back. That's not a good message to send the terrorists.
Now that rally's over, there's also another rally going on protesting the Iranian regime, and they're both right outside of the United Nations building. They want to make their voices heard during the same time the Iranian president speaks at the United Nations. Jason Perry, NTD News, New York.
And the
century of sleep, and then take a drive into the twilight zone.
Witness the long-awaited emotional family reunions.
Amazing. It's amazing. Unfreaking believable. We're so grateful to be together after 8 years. It's unbelievable. The nightmare is finally over. And this is the real hero of this story surviving 8 years of brutal treatment, but never losing hope. And showing what happens when you're hopeful, when you fight. Why am I saying this here? It's over. I'm done.
1, 2, 3. Freedom!
The returning Americans embraced their family and friends. 2 of the 5 Iranian detainees arrived in Doha on their way home. The other 3 chose to remain in the U.S. Meanwhile, President Biden is facing heat over the controversial swap deal, with some lawmakers calling it a ransom payment. China-funded programs in U.S. schools could be indoctrinating American children. Education experts are saying these programs also pose national security threats. NTD's Arlene Richards covers a hearing that
they prefer to be called. They are highly intelligent, and my attempts to educate them were quite successful. Within a matter of minutes, they were able to spell out, "Earth man, go home," using my 2 companions to form the letters. It was very gratifying. As you have doubtless already guessed,